You know, the story of us, it's the most epic tale you could ever imagine. It stretches all the way from our first shaky steps on the African savanna to our footprints on the moon. It's a wild ride of survival, discovery, and constant nonstop change. And that's the story we're going to try and tell right now.
So the big question is, how on earth do you cram all of that into just 5 minutes? I mean, it's a huge challenge, right? But we're gonna give it a shot by focusing on the major turning points, those big leaps forward that really truly made us who we are today.
All right, so here's the plan. We've broken down our entire history into 6 great chapters. We're going to start at the very beginning with our earliest ancestors. Then we'll jump to the invention of farming and cities, explore the age of empires, see how the world got connected, and then finally hit the fast forward button through the revolutions that created our modern world. Okay, chapter 1. Our story begins, as every human story does, in Africa. Now, this first chapter spans millions and millions of years, way longer than any other, and it's right here that the very foundations of humanity were forged. Just look at the insane scale of time we're talking about here. For millions of years, evolution was just tinkering. First, just walking upright. Seems simple, but it was an absolute game changer. Then came the first tools, which literally reshaped our hands and our brains. Mastering fire, that changed what we ate and how we socialized. And finally, our own species, Homo sapiens, starts this incredible journey out of Africa to populate the entire planet. And yeah, it all started with bipedalism, just standing up. It wasn't about getting a better view of predators. The real magic was that it freed up our hands. And with our hands free, we could suddenly carry things, create things, and change the world around us. That one single step opened the door to every single tool and technology that ever came after. For almost all of our history, we were wanderers, hunter-gatherers, moving with the seasons. But then, in what was basically the blink of an eye in geological time, absolutely everything changed. So the planet starts to warm up after the last ice age, and this incredible new idea takes root in the Fertile Crescent. We figured out how to grow our own food. This agricultural revolution was, you could argue, the most important pivot in our entire story. It didn't just change our diet, it eventually led to things we can't imagine living without, like writing. And it kicked off this amazing chain reaction. See, farming gives you a food surplus, which means you don't have to wander around anymore. So we started building permanent villages. And if you have a stable food supply, hey, not everybody has to be a farmer. This leads to specialists, artisans, leaders, soldiers, which in turn gives rise to the very first cities and complex societies. So what was the first thing we used this revolutionary new tech, writing, for? Was it for epic poems, love letters? No way. It was for accounting. The ancient Sumerians used cuneiform to keep track of grain, livestock, and, you guessed it, taxes. I guess some things you really never change. Now, once you have cities and writing, you get civilization as we recognize it. And this next era, wow, it saw the rise of these huge empires, revolutionary ideas, and world religions that still shape our cultures today. All across the globe, foundational civilizations were popping up. Over in Greece, you had philosophers questioning everything and inventing democracy. The Romans, they were brilliant engineers, building aqueducts and creating legal systems for a massive empire. And way over in India, new faiths like Buddhism were emerging, while in China, philosophies like Confucianism created a blueprint for society that would last for thousands of years. So as those great classical empires started to fade, the world didn't just go dark. Instead, it started to reconnect, but in totally new ways. Continents were being linked by these huge trade routes, spreading not just goods and ideas, but also, as we're about to see, some pretty devastating diseases. In Baghdad, you had the Islamic Golden Age, where scholars preserved and built on all that classical knowledge. A bit later, the Mongol Empire, built through conquest, actually made the Silk Road safer, which boosted trade between East and West like never before. But that connectivity had a terrifying downside. It allowed the Black Death to sweep across Eurasia. And then, a single voyage in 1492 connected the planet's two halves, and nothing was ever the same again. Just let this number sink in for a second. 50 million. And that's a conservative estimate of how many people died in Europe from the Black Death. That might have been half the population. It was a catastrophe on such an immense scale that it completely reshaped society. helping to break down the old feudal system and, weirdly, paving the way for the modern world. Which brings us to the modern era. This period is defined by this cascade of revolutions in how we think, how we govern ourselves, and how we build things. It completely transformed the planet in just a few hundred years.
And it all really kicked off with an idea. The idea that we could use reason, not just tradition or blind faith, to understand and improve the world. This movement, the Enlightenment, basically gave us the philosophical firepower to question the divine right of kings and to imagine societies built on things like liberty and human rights.
And pretty soon, those ideas exploded into action. The American Revolution used them to justify breaking away from a king and building a new republic. A little over a decade later, the French Revolution tried to tear down its entire social structure. So they were born from similar ideals, but their paths went in wildly different directions. One ended with a stable constitution, the other with terror and the rise of an emperor.
At the very same time, a totally different kind of revolution was happening. This one wasn't about ideas. It was about energy. The steam engine kicked off the Industrial Revolution, and it fundamentally changed human life for the first time since we invented farming. Millions of people left the countryside for a new, and often brutal, life in these booming industrial cities.
And that brings us to our final chapter, which covers the last 100 years or so. This is the era of exponential change, where the pace of history itself just seems to hit the accelerator, for better and for worse.
Man, the 20th century was just a whirlwind. It started with two of the most devastating wars in history. But out of that chaos, we saw old empires crumble, independence movements rise up, landmarked victories for civil rights, and then the sudden, shocking end to a global Cold War that had defined life for generations. For almost 50 years, the world was basically split in two. You had these two superpowers with completely opposite ideas about how society should work. This clash shaped literally everything from politics to pop culture, and it pushed all of humanity right to the very edge of nuclear annihilation. Which brings us right up to today. Our world is more connected than it has ever been, but we're facing this whole new set of super complex global problems. Things like geopolitical instability and the rise of AI are huge concerns, but so are pandemics that can spread in hours and the explosion of disinformation online. These are issues that don't care about borders, and they're going to require a level of cooperation we've never really managed before. And all of this is happening on a planet that's now home to over 8 billion people. Just think about that for a second. Our sheer numbers, combined with the power of our technology, give us this unprecedented ability to shape the future of our world. You know, when you step back and look at it all, our entire history is one long story of facing challenges, from surviving ice ages to building global civilizations. The challenges we face now are huge, for sure, but so is our capacity to innovate and adapt. We've literally gone from caves to the cosmos. So the question that leaves us with is this: what challenge is going to define our next chapter?